I would like to start us off by asking you to do something that may be a little uncomfortable. I'd like you to think back to a time when you were struggling with your health. Perhaps at one point you were dealing with a fever or serious stomach issues, a broken bone, or something that required you to spend time in a hospital. I would like you to remember what that felt like, not only physically, but mentally and spiritually. The burden of your health failing you, of your body not acting in the way that you needed to, and how hard it was at that moment. Now I would like you to think about the people who were with you in those moments. Did someone cook you a meal, or give you a ride to the hospital, or simply visit to see how you were doing? If you were in the hospital, do you remember the nurses and doctors that helped you get back to health? Do you remember how grateful you were at that moment to have those people with you, keeping you company during that very vulnerable time? That feeling of gratefulness and calm that we feel when we have people keeping us company when we are sick is a wonderful gift. It is a beautiful moment of human connection, that gift of letting someone know that in that moment of weakness and vulnerability, that they are not alone. That is a gift that the Lord tells us to share with other people. In the last few weeks, we have been talking about the different kinds of people that the Lord tells us to serve. We have talked about how to serve the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, and the naked. And today we are going to talk about how the Lord told us to serve the sick. The Lord told us to visit the sick, to serve people who are struggling with their health. And there are many ways in which we can do this. Perhaps you work in healthcare, and if you do, you are some of our best servants and ministers in the Lord's work of serving the sick. But even if you don't work in healthcare, you can still do a lot to serve people in this situation. There are many programs in hospitals and clinics that allow people to volunteer to provide companionship for patients, especially in facilities that are focused on serving the elderly or people from disadvantaged backgrounds or even children. We can volunteer to spend time with people who are sick and who may not have anybody else to visit them. And that can mean the world to that person. We also don't necessarily need to volunteer at a hospital or work in healthcare to serve the sick. We all know people who are sick. And even if we don't know someone who is sick right now, we will know someone at some point who is going to need companionship and support while struggling with an illness. In this case, we can visit the person who is struggling. We can bring them food. We can give them rides to the doctor. Or we can help them by simply spending time with them so that they can feel that they are loved and that they are not alone. These are just some of the ways in which we can serve the sick in the natural sense. Now, in the New Church, we not only minister to people's natural needs, but we also minister to their spiritual needs as well. So you may wonder, who are the spiritually sick that we are supposed to serve as the Lord told us to do? The spiritually sick are people who are struggling with the evil in their souls. This is because in the Word, sickness is a symbol for evil. And just as there are illnesses of all kinds, there are evils of all kinds. And they all affect every single person in a different way. There is a passage from Secrets of Heaven, which you can find in the back of your handout, that explains this idea further. And this passage says that the reason why sickness means evil is that in the internal sense, the kinds of things that attack spiritual life are meant. The sicknesses which attack it are evils, and they are called evil desires and cravings. And the components of spiritual life are faith and charity. That spiritual life is sick when falsity exists instead of the truth of faith, and evil instead of the good of charity, because they lead to the death of that life, which is called spiritual death and its damnation, just as sicknesses lead to the death of natural life. And it makes sense to think of sickness as evil if we think about it, as sickness is a malfunction of the body. When we are sick, our body stops working in the way that it is designed to work. And that brings a lot of suffering, not only for ourselves, but for the people around us as well. The Lord designed us to be kind, loving, and selfless. He designed us with the purpose that we would choose good and that we would follow Him. So when we don't follow that design, when we choose to do evil by insulting others or lying to get ahead in life or cheating on our partner, when we do all of those things, it is like someone infecting themselves with a disease. Going down this path and refusing to change our ways is like someone who is increasingly becoming ill, refusing to get medical attention. When we do this, our spirit becomes sicker and sicker until finally we succumb to spiritual death, which in the word is damnation, or choosing hell instead of heaven. The only cure for this spiritual sickness is following the Lord. The Lord provides us with the knowledge to heal our spiritual illness, and He heals us when we follow the commandments He provides in the Word. When we repent from our evils and read the Word and follow the Lord's commandments and start to do good for our neighbors in our communities, then we begin the process of healing our souls and becoming spiritually healthy. Or to put it in simpler terms, the Lord is our doctor, the Word is our prescription, and our actions are the treatment against our spiritual sickness. Without following this process, there is no cure for that unhealthy spiritual state. So now that we know that the spiritually sick are those of us who are struggling with evil in their souls, we may wonder, well, how do we serve these people? And this can be a very difficult thing to figure out, because in many cases, the spiritually sick can be dangerous to be around. For example, if someone is a very physically violent person, we need to be careful of our personal safety, in the same way that we would need to be careful when being around someone who has a contagious disease. Sometimes the best thing we can do is to create some distance so that we don't become sick ourselves. However, we can't use this as an excuse in every case. It is very important that we recognize that most kinds of spiritual sickness are not contagious, because unlike with the sickness of the body, we choose our spiritual sickness. In the same way that we won't get a broken arm by being around someone with a broken arm, unless we do something that breaks our own arm. We won't be contaminated with other people's evil by being around them, unless we decide to participate in the same evil that they are doing. For example, we won't become greedy by being around greedy people, unless we decide to be greedy as well. But nevertheless, we do need to be careful about our own spiritual health while we are trying to serve the spiritually sick in our lives. So how do we serve the spiritually sick in a way that is appropriate for their situation while taking care of our own spiritual health at the same time? What is our responsibility? And one very important thing to recognize is that the Lord told us to visit the sick. He didn't tell us to heal the sick. We cannot heal other people's spiritual sickness. The only one who can heal spiritual sickness is the Lord. And He can only do that when the person who is struggling chooses themselves to follow the Lord's commandments. Our job is not to heal the sick, but to visit the sick. And you may wonder, what does this look like in practice? Well, the Lord showed us how to do this during His ministry. There is a wonderful story from the Gospel of Mark in which the Lord was having dinner with a group of tax collectors. In the time of the Lord, tax collectors were Jews who would go around collecting taxes from the people of Israel for the colonizers of Israel, the Roman Empire. And these tax collectors would often do this by using violence, by killing people, and they would even extort the people of Israel, forcing them to pay extra money so that they themselves could make more money and get richer. So when we read that the Lord was having dinner with tax collectors, he wasn't just having dinner with a group of the Israelite IRS. The Lord was having dinner with members of organized crime. The Lord was having dinner with the mob. And of course, the Pharisees were really upset about this because the Lord was a rabbi. He was a teacher. He was a holy man. And there he was having dinner with some of the worst criminals in Israel. So the Pharisees who were upset about this asked the Lord, "Why are you having dinner with these people? Why are you doing this?" And the Lord answered, "It is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Now, we have already said that we can't do what the Lord does. We can't heal people's spirits. But what we can do is follow the Lord's example and be there for the people who are struggling with spiritual illness, showing them that there is an alternative to the life that they are living. A very important thing to remember is that every single one of us is vulnerable to illness, and every single one of us has been sick in our natural bodies. And if we're honest with ourselves and we look in the mirror, we will recognize that we have also been spiritually sick at many points in our lives. Perhaps we have dealt with the very same spiritual sickness that the person we're trying to serve is struggling with, but we followed, hopefully, the Lord's treatment and became spiritually healthy again. We can share our own experience of dealing with this spiritual sickness with others who are struggling, letting them know that there is a cure, there is an alternative to the unhealthy life that they are living. And this may be uncomfortable, but hospital visits are very rarely pleasant. The Lord was perfect. He never became spiritually sick, but he did know what it was like to struggle with temptation. In fact, he struggled with terrible temptations all throughout his time on earth. By being there with the tax collectors and spending time with them, the Lord was communicating and building connections with people who were spiritually sick. And he was showing them that there was a cure for their spiritual illness, that there was a way to overcome their sickness, a path of healing. It is true, we don't heal anybody, but by being around people who are spiritually sick and maintaining our values and showing them that there is another way, that there is an alternative to the evil that is harming their lives, we can help to connect these people with a source of spiritual healing. And if we open ourselves up and share how we have dealt with our own spiritual sickness, we can offer hope. Just how we would do with someone who is struggling with a physical illness, we can be present with the people who are struggling with a spiritual illness. We can offer them comfort and companionship that is appropriate to their situation. And in that way, we can offer them an alternative that may lead to a path of spiritual healing by means of the Lord. And if we do this, we can serve the spiritually sick in the way that the Lord told us to do. Amen.